one thing that I definitely want to highlight, the biggest standout among the cast and the person who pretty much steals the entire movie every time they're on screen is Chris Hemsworth's character, Lord Dementus. He's the motorcycle warlord who has just these great aspirations of power, and he wants to dominate the Wasteland. He isn't the biggest raider or warlord out there, so he has to try and scheme his way to the top. And him and his gang do a number of despicable things throughout this entire movie. But he's just such a fun character to watch. Let's go ahead and move on to my review for Furiosa, a Mad Max saga. A little bit of an awkward title, I have to say at the top, chat. A lot of people, when I was getting my tickets for the movie, a lot of people were saying Mad Max 2, which was so funny. And it's like, no, that movie came out in the early 1980s. That was 1981. It's not called Mad Max 2. A lot of people were calling it Fury Road 2. But it's just called Fury. I think they should have just called it. I know why they want to connect it to Mad Max, because that is the franchise. That's the brand. You want to put Mad Max in there, since that's how people know of it. But it's just been so amusing to hear just out in public how people, what people are calling the movie as they were ordering tickets, because there were several people ahead of me that were ordering, and one group said Mad Max 2 and then the other one said Fury Road 2, and I said it proper. I just said Furiosa, please. Can I get a ticket for one ticket for Furiosa? So I found that very amusing. So not the strongest title, chat. But let me go ahead and start off by saying I'm a pretty big fan of the Mad Max series, with Mad Max 2, the proper one, The Road Warrior, being my absolute favorite. Just recently watched it with you guys, and that was so much fun. But I've enjoyed all the films in the series, so far, all the way back with the original Mad Max, which came out in 1979. Very different from the rest of the films. I mean, that was still, that how that movie came to be is kind of miraculous. It's more of a dystopian film. It's society hasn't fallen apart yet, but it's certainly sick. There are certainly issues and problems and things. Commerce is still being exchanged, businesses are still operating, but you just have these bands of roaming gangs, motorcycle gangs, and you have this police force which just can't handle it because these gangs are just spread all across various communities and towns and cities and things. And I really enjoy that movie. Road Warriors, that's the one that kind of established the aesthetics of the franchise, and they would carry that forward into Thunderdome, Fury Road, etc., and the Furiosa, of course. And also, it just had such a huge impact on just the post-apocalyptic subgenre. It just set the aesthetics of the world. What people are often fighting over. It's really cool. So much of Fallout, like the video game series, and other post-apocalyptic movies and video games and TV shows and books have all taken from Mad Max 2, The Road Warrior. So it's an incredibly influential movie, and it's my favorite of the franchise. I don't think that's controversial to say. I don't think that's a hyperbolic statement. I think it's, I still think it's probably the best of the franchise as well. Always loved that movie. It was just so great to rewatch it again. And listen, Thunderdome, I think a lot of people would say is probably the weakest film in the series, though it has been quite some time since I've seen it. So I want to rewatch it and just kind of, with fresh eyes, because it's been quite a while. I think it's been 10 years since I've watched the movie. But even that one is fun. I like that movie too. I think Tina Turner is a great antagonist in that movie. She's one of the most memorable things about it as well. The Thunderdome in general, I think, is a really cool idea. You got Master Blaster, Chad. Master Blaster, certainly iconic. So it has a lot of things going for it. And then you kind of had the triumphant return of the franchise in 2015 with Mad Max, Fury Road, which, it's certainly more exaggerated than the previous films, which are a lot more grounded, of course. It made use of various, visual effects that were just not available at the time, a little more CGI. But I think for the most part, that movie is fantastic. I think it kind of brought Mad Max back to the pop culture zeitgeist, introduced new generations to the character in that world and what George Miller had created so many years ago, decades ago. Did a lot right. It introduces to, I think, a fantastic supporting character in the franchise with Furiosa. Like, honestly, it's a great movie, and I know for a lot of people it's their favorite Mad Max film, and I can understand as to why, of course, too. But I think, like, it's funny enough, as great as that movie is, and it is great, I feel like the weakest part of that movie is actually Mad Max himself, is Tom Hardy's character, and that's due to a variety of things. One, because Tom Hardy was just infamously difficult to work with on that movie and was very disrespectful to George Miller, and so I don't think we're ever going to see Tom Hardy return to the character again, and honestly, that's, I think, for the best. I think there's much better actors out there that could play that character, and I'm hoping that's what we get in the future, if George Miller gets his way. But now we come to Furiosa itself. It's the first spin-off film, and hopefully not the last spin-off film in this series. But before getting into just how I feel about this movie, let me provide you with a synopsis for Furiosa: a Mad Max saga. Set years before Fury Road, a young Furiosa falls in the hands of the great biker horde led by warlord Dementus, who battles Immortan Joe for dominance of the Wasteland. So I'm going to get this question out of the way very quickly, because so many people have been asking it and will continue to ask for quite some time, for quite a while, since the movie is just so new. That question being, is Furiosa better than Mad Max Fury Road, or the best film in the series? Which to me is still the Road War. Again, the answer to that question is no. But that doesn't mean that the movie is bad. Matter of fact, I think Furiosa is pretty good throughout, though I think it has several flaws that stand out to me that prevent it from being the best of the Mad Max saga so far. The film does have a lot of great stuff going for it, especially when it comes to several of the performances and just the production design throughout. When it was announced that George Miller was going to make a Furiosa spinoff, I think many of us just assumed he would bring back Charlize Theron, who, again, obviously played the character in Fury Road. It just made sense since she was the lead of that film and she was the standout of that movie, and honestly was just a far more memorable character than Tom Hardy's version of Mad Max. But Miller instead decided to recast this since he was exploring a much younger version of Charlize Theron's Furiosa. And, I have to admit, I was a bit disappointed, but not upset. I wasn't upset. And thankfully, Anya Taylor-Joy and especially Aliyah Brown, who plays an even younger version of Furiosa, I think both do a good job. Brown was previously in Sting from earlier this year, and she gets a good chunk of this film for herself. And she does a great job for what she's given. There was never a second that I didn't buy her as Furiosa, and she gets several scenes that are just very impressive, and she has to act off like several talented people as well. She really holds her own in the movie, and I honestly, I completely bought her as this little girl who inevitably grows up to be Charlize Theron's version of the character. It's like this version of the character, this youngest, is the person who has all this horrifying, traumatic things happen to them. It's all through her eyes that we see all this, and she goes through all these traumatic experiences. This is what inevitably shapes her to the woman she later becomes, which is what we see with Anya Taylor-Joy later on in the film, and then, of course, of Charlize Theron later on. I was very impressed by her. I knew we were going to get that young version of the character. I did not know to what extent of screen time she was going to be given. But she gets what I feel like might be like 45 to like 50 minutes of the movie, which is, nearly half the film. So pretty impressive that I was so captivated by what she was doing. She's very good, very, very good. And Anya Taylor-Joy, she's also good. But I gotta admit, she doesn't nearly get as much dialogue as I would have liked. You know, she's very intense, and I think she's at her best when she's opposite Chris Hemsworth's character, who I'll get to in just a minute. The movie does a lot of, here's how Furiosa met this person. Here's how she got to this place, and here's how she got her robot arm, etc. And it's like, okay, that's all well and good and everything. That's fine. You know, they also introduce a romance subplot to the film, which I found initially interesting, but it's an element that you kind of instantly know where it's going to go as soon as they introduce it, since, well, this is a prequel, and you don't see that particular character ever again. And I don't know, you know, suddenly I'm just realizing, just talking about it. And again, I think Joy is good in the role, but I kind of feel like Brown had the better performance of the two and was involved in more interesting things throughout the movie. But still, I think Anya Taylor-Joy does a good job. Lastly, Joy's eyes are so fucking big in this movie. And we've always said Anya Taylor-Joy, she's got some big old peepers. No doubt, she's a beautiful woman, a very talented actress, no question about it. But she's got the eyes of a horse. She has 360-degree vision, chat. She can see everything in front of her and all the way in back of her at the same exact time. You gotta put some goddamn blinders on her, like this, from the right to the left and top to bottom, for her just to like look straight. And the only thing I didn't really find all that believable is like, okay, but how did her eyes shrink to the size of Theron's eyes in Fury Road? They do not explain that. They explain how she ends up meeting Immortan Joe. They explain how she ends up becoming an Imperator, and they explain how she got her robot arm, but they did not explain how her eyes got very, very small by the time we see her in Fury Road. And I was wondering, are they going to address that? They do not. So, George Miller, if you're going to make a Furiosa 2, you know, Warlords of the Desert, whatever the hell it's going to be, explain the eyes to me, good sir. Now, one thing that I definitely want to highlight, the biggest standout among the cast, and the person who pretty much steals the entire movie every time they're on screen, is Chris Hemsworth's character, Lord Dementus. He's the motorcycle warlord who has just these great aspirations of power, and he wants to dominate the Wasteland. He isn't the biggest raider or warlord out there, so he has to like try and like scheme his way to the top. And him and his gang do a number of despicable things throughout this entire movie. But he's just such a fun character to watch. And he's so charismatic that you just can't help but be charmed by him. You know, for those concerned that it's like, oh, is he just going to be kind of like another Immortan Joe, who is in the movie, by the way, obviously not played by the original actor who sadly passed away. They have a much younger actor playing Immortan Joe. But he's not like Immortan Joe. But I love that. That's great. Because I just don't want copies of other villains from the franchise. You know, I just don't want to see a placeholder for Lord Humongous or Toe Cutter or something like that, or Tina Turner. He stands on his own. And I think you can make an argument that Lord Dementus might be one of the best, if not the best villain in the franchise. He just gets so much to do and is just so funny. You know, the movie, honestly, is at its strongest when he is on screen. And when other characters are often interacting with him, especially Furiosa. You know, I wanted, honestly, more of the movie to be more about just the two of them and their relationship and rivalry over time, over the years. You know, Hemsworth's Dementus brings out the best in Anya Taylor-Joy because she just hates him for a variety of things that the movie establishes throughout its nearly 2.5 hour, you know, running time. But yeah, I was so impressed by Hemsworth, you know, who's always been like a great actor. He's always been a great comedic actor. And I feel like for a lot of people, they just always see him as like Thor, and he's great as Thor, you know, even some of the weakest, you know, Marvel films that, you know, where that character has appeared in. He's always, I've always really enjoyed him, especially like in Ragnarok and Infinity War and stuff like that, you know, and Endgame, you know, he's great. But I like, you can tell he's having such a blast playing this character. One, because he's just given the lion's share of interesting things to do in the movie. Now, when it comes to, you know, I mentioned the 2.5 hour running time. The movie is long. You know, there's no question about that. It's the longest in the franchise, I believe, as well. It's like nearly 2.5 hours. And there are times where you're going to feel its length, you know, unlike Fury Road, for instance, which I feel like moved at a much better clip. Now, it has more going on in it than, say, Fury Road in terms of, you know, the world building and the characterization. There's a lot more characters that we come to know in this movie than we do in Fury Road or many of the other Mad Max movies, which I think is a great thing, you know. But don't go in thinking every single moment of this movie is just an action scene that continues into another action scene. It's not like that. You know, it doesn't have that type of pacing that Fury Road has. However, despite that, so many other things about this movie does work, like the production design, the makeup, the costumes, the vehicle designs are so awesome looking in this movie. I loved all these different like tribes and groups just having their own individual aesthetics and culture, which also just helps them stand out amongst each other, you know, within the film itself, within the Wasteland. I thought that was like really, really cool. Also, the music and the sound design, especially the sound design, is fantastic across the board. Like, no complaints on either of those two things. Like, when I'm like, so far this year, when it comes to just, you know, I think the score is impeccable, but when it's in terms of the sound design, how these vehicles are just ripping across, you know, the desert landscapes and everything, and smash into each other and things, and just all the weapons like shooting, you know, at the vehicles, like all that's great. Some of the best sound design I feel like so far this year. However, I do have one major complaint, and it's something I was growing concerned about, like as more trailers were coming out over time as they were being released. And that's the CGI. Now, despite what some people say, Fury Road did use a lot of CGI, and sometimes it didn't always work in that movie. But most of the time, it assisted big practical action set pieces, and it did look pretty good. There is a lot of CGI and green screen in this movie, and you can tell, and it doesn't always look good. Matter of fact, it sometimes looks pretty fake. And there was like several times where it took me out of the movie itself. It's very obvious that we're just not in a desert or really outside at all. It's just like, after coming off of watching the original 2 Mad Max movies, where it was all filmed outside, uses practical effects and stunt work, you know, it just made me go like, despite you having all the money in the world, it has like, what, $160 million budget or something like that, it just doesn't reach the same heights in terms of the action set pieces, you know, or the gritty spectacle of the original films. And that left me pretty disappointed. You know, that's my biggest disappointment with this film. I almost, as I was watching it, especially when we get into the last hour of the movie, I almost would have wanted if they kind of held back from some of those big set pieces. They introduced some new types of things that we haven't seen in the world of Mad Max that, you know, that are involved in these big action set pieces. But I almost was like, you know, I don't even really need this. You could almost take out some of these elements, and so much of them are relying on green screen and CGI. And if they were gone, if you had instead maybe made it not as big and over the top, it would have looked better, honestly. I kind of wish they toned it down, but maybe Miller feels like, well, I got to be even bigger now than Fury Road. But in his quest to be even bigger than Fury Road, he's not going to be able to do some of these things with practical effects or stunt work. It'd be too dangerous. It'd be too expensive. So they have to use CGI. And when they use it, it's like, you can tell, it's like, well, that's not, like, I was just thinking about the scene in Road Warrior, which we just watched last night, where you have that one guy who just gets ejected from his vehicle, and it's like a real person. He's like spinning in the air. It's like, that's not a dummy. That's not a CGI person. That was a fucking guy, you know, and it holds up to this day because it's real. It's like, oh shit. And then he hits the ground. It's like, oh damn. And it's just like, I'm watching this movie, and you see people fleeing in the air and getting flung around and getting sucked under, a bus or whatever, and it's just like, that's a CGI guy. That's not a real person. That's not even a dummy. It just looks fake. And that it took me out. It took me out of the movie, which is not what you want with your Mad Max film. I think one of the reasons why the movies have continued to be so well liked and revered, loved, copied to this day is because of their aesthetics and just their realistic action scenes. They're just they hold up. 40 years later, they look so goddamn good. Whereas in this movie, I'm sorry, but this stuff. I mean, I think it's already kind of outdated looking, but. And 2 years from now, it's going to be outdated. However, despite that, I walked away from the film liking it a lot more than not, especially when it came to Chris Hemsworth, who pretty much just steals the movie from Furiosa. Honestly, at the end, I kind of wanted okay, if we're going to do more spin-offs, can we just do Lord Dementus, warlord of the Wasteland? Can we just do that? Can we see his origin story? Because they go into what happened to him and why he's the way he is. And it's just this is kind of interesting. He actually gets a lot of backstory. He gets a lot of depth. And I'm I want to see more of this guy, actually. So I honestly wouldn't mind that. And, it's funny. It's Furiosa steals the movie from Mad Max and Fury Road. And here we have another character, Lord Dementus. Warlord Dementus steals Furiosa's movie from her. So it's very interesting. That kind of keeps happening in these movies. But again, any case, he's great. I think Anya Taylor-Joy, for what she's given, is quite good. Brown, I think, is the best since Theron, honestly, playing the character. But I enjoyed the movie. I don't think it reaches the same heights as Fury Road. I don't think it's the best Mad Max movie. It's got some really good things in it, no doubt about it. Chris Hemsworth, obviously, is one of those things. I think you can make an argument. He's probably the best villain in the franchise. But it has a few notable flaws. But I still really enjoy it. I still feel like it's worth seeing in the theater. I think a lot of people are going to dig it if you go in with the right expectations. Again, do not go into this movie thinking, I'm going to see an even better version of Fury Road. It's not. It's not that. I think you can walk away really liking this movie, having it be one of your favorite films of the year, but just don't go and think it's going to be better than this or that. But what about you guys? Those who have seen the movie, did you really like the film? I really liked it, but were you more mixed on it? Did you not like it? I'm very curious. Please go ahead and let me know.
5 minutes later.
I'm curious. Katria, hands. Good to see you, Katria. A little happy tappy Dono dance. I just finished my review for Furiosa. I really liked it. I really liked the movie. Couple flaws. Made it from being great, but it's very good. I think it's very good. Let me see what you guys are saying. I'm curious. Yeah, budget was $168 million. Yeah, and insurance companies, sure. Vortex, so I think COVID did have a role to play with this, and I wouldn't be shocked if the lawsuit that Miller had with W after Fury Road probably played a role in how big Miller wanted to go practical effects. But yeah. Okay, CGI. I wouldn't be shocked if it because Miller had a huge drama with WB because he went over budget despite it being WB's fault, had an effect on how Miller approached the movie and how he filmed it. Yeah, he keeps overshadowing the telekill. Yeah, that's what's happened. It's happened twice now. Happened twice. Oh, Lord. Yeah. Let's see. Jacob Elordi is a young Dementus. He's Australian. Oh, well, I like Jacob Elordi. I do. I would kind of like to cast someone who looks like the original actor, to be perfectly honest. I guess I'm looking at Jacob Elordi. Maybe I have to see them side by side, but I don't see Jacob Elordi being a younger version of Chris Hemsworth. I don't know who I would go with. It's a good question, though. Ace Rock, I honestly don't think Dementus was that bad of a guy. He's more of a mediocre white man middle mage than anything. I love how you see him. No, I love that. That's what I love about him. I love that's how he is. He's not this ultimate, he's the greatest threat of the wasteland. He's kind of a fucking schemer. He's not nearly as big or as powerful as Immortan Joe, and so he has to do things a little differently than other warlords. And I thought that was cool. I thought that was an interesting approach to this type of character that we've kind of seen throughout, obviously the Mad Max series, but just post-apocalyptic content in general, whether it be in films or TV shows or video games or books or something like that. I was this is kind of a new take on this, and I thought that was pretty inspiring. And it just felt like, well, because he's kind of the underdog of the warlords, he has to do things a little differently, and so his personality pops a little bit more. The rest of these guys are kind of like, they're resting on their laurels. Immortan Joe's like, I have all this, right? Which I think that's cool. But good to have you. Good cheer. Hope you're doing well. Now he's like, I don't know. I'll see if I can squeeze it in before Discord. But yeah, now you keep Chris Hemsworth's Dementus, since Furiosa has several time jumps of multiple years. So you can set a movie with him between the years. That's true. That's true. Yeah, you could do that. We could just keep him, and now it's just like, here's a side story. Yeah, that would be kind of interesting. Yeah, I enjoyed it a lot, especially Hemsworth. Yeah, I think everyone's going to come out of this saying, like, whether you like the movie or not, which I feel like most people will come out of this, like, really liking it. I think he's the best thing in it, honestly. That's always disappointing here, are the ones that stole these couple. Yeah, at least these recent, this new era of Mad Max films. It is interesting that is happening. Does it become a trend if it happens in the third one? I wonder. Or is it a trend when it happens a second time? I feel like if it happens 3 times, then it's a trend.